The dashboard clock read 2:14 a.m. when I finally stopped staring at that paper. My hand was shaking so badly the page was rattling. Actually rattling like something inside me had come loose and couldn't find its way back. I read the line one more time. The way you reread something you're hoping will change if you just look at it differently. It didn't change. Probability of paternity 0%. 0. Not low. Not uncertain. 0. I sat in that parking lot for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock the way a drowning man watches the surface. Counting, counting, counting like the numbers meant something. Like if I sat there long enough, the right decision would find me. It didn't. So, I made the wrong one. I drove home. I parked in the driveway of the house I'd spent 4 years paying into. Walked through the front door I'd install myself. And went straight to the bedroom closet. One bag. I told myself one bag meant I wasn't really leaving. Just creating space to think. I know now that was a lie. I needed to believe in order to move my hands. I was almost out the door when my feet stopped moving. The nursery was at the end of the hall. The door was cracked open the way. Diane always left it just enough to hear if Nora stirred. I stood in that hallway for a long time looking at that sliver of warm light coming through the gap. I could hear her breathing, tiny, even completely unaware. I didn't go in. I turned around and walked out. And then my phone lit up on the passenger seat as I backed out of the driveway. A text from Diane sent just minutes before. She must have woken and checked the monitor. It said, "She smiled today. First smile. Come see her." I put the car in reverse and kept going. I called Diane the next morning from a motel. Room that smelled like old carpet and someone else's regret. I'd rehearsed what I was going to say probably 40 times between 4 a.m. and 8 a.m. lying on top of the covers with my shoes still on, staring at a ceiling I didn't recognize. I had it all mapped out. The tone, the words, the controlled delivery of a man who had made a rational decision based on evidence. I was going to be calm. I was going to be clear. I was going to say what needed to be said without falling apart. She picked up on the second ring. I told her I was filing for divorce. I told her I'd seen the results. I told her I wasn't going to raise another man's child. And even as I said it, I heard my own father's voice underneath mine. The same sentence, the same cold certainty. And I kept talking anyway because stopping felt more dangerous than continuing. Diane didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't deny it. There was silence on the line long enough that I checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. It hadn't. She was still there. I could hear her breathing slow and deliberate, the way she breathed when she was keeping herself together by sheer force of will. I'd seen her do it at her mother's funeral. I recognized it. Then she said it. You already knew. 3 words. No anger in them. No desperation. Just a quiet bone-level certainty that hit me somewhere I didn't have a name for. I opened my mouth to ask what she meant. Did she mean I already knew she'd cheated? Did she mean I'd been looking for a reason to leave and the test had simply handed me one? Did she mean something else entirely? Something I was too shattered to decode in that moment? I never asked. I told myself it was a confession. I told myself the phrasing was guilt folding in on itself. I hung up the phone and sat on the edge of that motel bed with my elbows on my knees and my head in my hands, and I made the decision right there to stop wondering what she meant and start building a life that didn't include the answer. That was the second worst decision I ever made. The first was leaving without going into that nursery. For the next 2 years, those 3 words would surface at the worst moments. In the middle of work meetings at 3 a.m. In the pause. Between one thought and the next. You already knew. I told myself I understood them. I didn't understand anything. 6:11 a.m. 6 months after I left. I was standing in my kitchen making coffee. I didn't want when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. A 443 area code. Baltimore. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'd gotten good at letting things go by then. But something made me pick up on the last ring before it cut. The woman on the other end introduced herself as a representative from St. Carver Medical Center's legal department. She spoke in that careful, measured tone people use when they're reading from script designed by lawyers. Every word chosen, nothing wasted. She said they were conducting an internal audit of lab procedures from the previous 18 months. She said my name had appeared on a flagged list. She said they may need me to resubmit a biological sample for verification purposes. I asked her why. She paused just briefly, just long enough to tell me the pause meant something. And then she said, "There is an irregularity with a technician's batch processed on the night of your original test. Mr. Bello, we are reaching out to all potentially affected patients as a precautionary measure." I set my coffee down very carefully. The way you set something down when your hands have stopped being reliable. An irregularity, a technician's batch. The night of my original test. My mind went immediately to the result, to that number, 0%. I thought about how certain it had looked on paper, how official, how final. How I had built an entire collapsed life on top of it without once questioning the foundation. I was a structural engineer. I knew better than anyone what happened when you built on compromised ground. I asked for the callback number. I wrote it on the back of a takeout menu because it was the only paper near me. I thanked her in a voice that didn't sound like mine and hung up. Then I sat down on my kitchen floor. I told myself it was probably nothing. Audits happened. Legal departments covered themselves. The result had been real. I had held it in my hands. I had read it under the parking lot lights. I had read it 4 more times to be sure it was real. I picked up the phone an hour later and called the number back. It went to voicemail, a generic automated voicemail with no name attached. Just a beep waiting for me to say something into it. I left my name and number and a reason for my call and hung up feeling more unsettled than before I dialed. Nobody called me back for 2 weeks. I hired Frank Duca 3 weeks after that phone call because 2 weeks of silence from St. Carver's legal department had left me in a place. I didn't trust myself to stay in alone. Frank wrapped both hands around his coffee mug and looked at me the way experienced men look at younger ones who've made expensive mistakes. "She's clean Marcus cleaner than most people I investigate." I stared at the folder. If there was no affair, what did the test mean? What did any of it mean? I was closing the folder when something near the bottom caught my eye. A single line in Frank's notes. An anomaly he'd flagged but hadn't explained. During his background sweep, he'd found a search in Diane's personal ancestry account. She'd been researching my family history. Specifically, she'd searched my mother's name. My mother had been dead for 3 years. I looked up at Frank. He shrugged slowly. "Couldn't tell you what that means. But she wasn't looking for a man. She was looking for something in your family." I drove home with the folder on my passenger seat and Frank's words sitting in my chest like something that hadn't decided yet whether it was hope or dread. 18 months after leaving, I walked into a firm-wide project briefing on a Thursday morning, running 4 minutes late, coffee in hand, already scanning the room for a seat near the back. The project was a new city bridge. My kind of work. The kind that required precision and patience and an understanding of how weight distributed itself across long distances. I didn't see her until she turned around. Diane was standing at the front of the room beside a projection screen, a laser pointer in one hand, and a design portfolio under her arm. She'd always been talented. I knew that, had always known that. But seeing her there composed and authoritative, in front of 60 engineers and project managers landed differently than I expected. Our eyes met for exactly 3 seconds. The room wasn't watching us. They had no reason to. But those 3 seconds felt long. Enough to contain everything we hadn't said in 18 months. Then Diane turned back to the screen, clicked to her first slide, and said, "Shall we begin?" She presented for 40 minutes. Precise, confident, not a single stumble. She referenced load distribution models I recognized as sophisticated, the kind of work that took years to develop. She answered questions without hesitation. She didn't look at me once. I sat in that room pretending to take notes, writing nothing, feeling the specific humiliation of being outperformed by someone you wronged. Every slide she advanced felt like a quiet, professional verdict. When the meeting ended, people filtered out around me. I gather my things slowly, buying time for a reason I couldn't name. That's when I saw her left hand as she gathered her folders. A ring, simple band, white gold. She'd remarried. I walked out of the building and sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could trust myself to drive. I saw Nora for the second time in a grocery store on a Wednesday afternoon in November, nearly 2 years after I'd left. I was in the cereal aisle, reaching for something I didn't need when I heard a child's laugh. That particular kind of unguarded, whole-body laugh that small children produce before the world teaches them to hold back. I turned toward it automatically. Diane was pushing a cart. Nora was sitting in the front of it, almost 2 years old now, wearing a yellow jacket and holding a box of crackers she'd clearly pulled from shelf herself. She was beautiful in a way that hit me somewhere structural. The kind of beauty that doesn't announce itself, just quietly dismantles you. I should have turned away. I didn't. A man appeared from the next aisle, tall, steady-looking, the kind of presence that fills a room without trying. He placed a hand on Diane's shoulder, with the ease of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. Nora looked up immediately, face opening like a door. She reached both arms upward. Dada. I stood there holding a cereal box, completely still while something I had no right to feel move through me like a current. I had left. I had made that choice. Whatever this was, this hollow, crumbling feeling I had built it myself. The man, David, I would later learn, looked across the aisle and saw me. I don't know how he knew who I was, but he did. I could tell by the way his expression shifted. Not to triumph, not to coldness, to guilt. He looked at me for 2 seconds with the face of a man carrying something heavy. Something he hadn't chosen to carry, but had picked up anyway because it was on the ground and someone had to. Then he looked away. I put the cereal box back and left the store without buying anything. My mother's sister, Vera, came to visit me on a Sunday in January. She was passing through Baltimore on her way to see an old friend in Philadelphia and call me the night before, the way she always did with no real warning and complete confidence that I'd be home. I was always home. She knew that. We ate dinner together at my kitchen table, and somewhere between the second glass of wine and the comfortable silence that old family settles into, I mentioned Nora. I don't know why. I hadn't planned to. Her name just came out of me the way things do when you've been holding them too long. I pulled up a photo on my phone, one I still had, one I hadn't been able to delete, and slid it across the table to Vera without saying anything else. Vera went completely still. Not the stillness of politeness, the stillness of recognition. "Marcus," she said, and her voice had changed into something careful. "Where did this baby get those eyes?" I looked at the photo. Nora's eyes were grey at the center with a dark ring around the iris. I'd noticed it before, but never attached meaning to it. It was just how her eyes looked. Vera reached into her purse and produced a photograph. Black and white, small, the edges soft with age. A woman holding an infant. Both of them looking at something outside the frame. "That is your grandmother. She came from Romania before your grandfather brought her here. And that baby Vera touched the infant in the photo had those exact eyes. That grey ring. I have never seen it in anyone else, not once until right now." I looked between the two photographs for a long time. My mouth had gone completely dry. I went to St. Carver Medical Center in person on a Tuesday morning because calling clearly wasn't working and I had run out of patience for voicemails that disappeared into silence. I asked for the legal department at the front desk. The receptionist looked at my name, looked at her screen, and then excused herself. She was gone for 19 minutes. I counted. When she came back, she had a man with her mid-50s jacket. The careful face of someone who managed difficult conversations professionally. He introduced himself as the patient relations supervisor and asked me to follow him to a small room off the main corridor. The kind of room hospitals keep for news they can't deliver in hallways. He sat across from me, folded his hands on the table, and said, Mr. Bello. We've been attempting to reach you. A lawsuit was filed last month by another family. Same technician, same batch date, same processing error. You are the second case we've identified. I heard the words. I process them one at a time. The way you process something that is simultaneously confirming everything you feared and destroying everything you built on top of that fear. The results he received were based on a misprocessed sample, he continued. A temporary technician that night handled 3 samples and mislabeled 2. He has since been terminated. We can retest you today at no cost with results in 48 hours. I said yes. I said it before he finished the sentence. I drove home afterward and sat in my car outside my apartment building for an hour. Engine off, watching people move in and out of the lobby like the world was still operating on its normal logic. 48 hours had never felt so long. The technician who delivered my results this time was a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and the practiced stillness of someone who had sat across from people in difficult moments before. She slid the folder across the table without preamble. I opened it. Probability of paternity 99.998%. Nora was my daughter. I made it to the bathroom before I was sick. I gripped the cold edge of the sink after and stared at myself in the mirror for a long time at the face of a man who had abandoned his own child based on a mislabeled vial, who had let a 22-year-old temp's mistake rewrite his entire life, who had looked at his newborn daughter through a cracked nursery door and walked away, who had become exactly what his father was. My father had left my mother when I was 4. He had suspected infidelity. Wrongly, my mother told me years later, quietly, without bitterness. And he had chosen certainty over inquiry. He had chosen the exit over the question. I had watched what that decision cost him. I had promised myself as a child, as a teenager, as a man standing at his own altar that I would never make it. I made it anyway. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the bathroom floor with my back against the cabinet. Knees up, eyes closed. I stayed there for a long time. No one came in. The fluorescent light hummed above me. I let it. When I finally stood up, I knew what I had to do. I just didn't know yet how much it was going to cost me. I drove to Diane's house that evening without calling ahead because I knew if I called, I would lose my nerve or she would ask me not to come and I would have to respect that. And I wasn't ready to respect it yet. I needed to see her face. I needed to say it out loud to a real person in real air. David answered the door. He looked at me with no surprise on his face. None at all. And before I could open my mouth, he said, "I've been waiting for you to figure it out." I stared at him. "You knew." He stepped outside and pulled the door mostly closed behind him. And we stood on the front porch in the cold like 2 men sorting through something that belonged to both of us and neither of us simultaneously. He told me Diane had never cheated. He told me she had never even come close. He told me he had married her because someone had to show up for her for Nora when I had made it clear I wouldn't. I always knew this. Day would come. He said he wasn't cruel about it. He was tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying weight that was never yours to carry. Then he said the thing that unlocked everything. She found your mother's letter, Marcus. That's what she meant when she said, "You already knew." She thought you'd read it and left anyway. The porch light flickered once above us. I had no idea what letter he was talking about. And somehow that was the worst thing I'd heard yet. Diane agreed to meet me alone 3 days later. Neutral ground. Her suggestion, a coffee shop neither of us had history in. She was already there when I arrived, sitting with both hands around a mug. And she looked like someone who had decided before, walking in exactly how much of herself she was willing to spend on this conversation. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She placed an envelope on the table between us and slid it toward me with 2 fingers. The way you handle something that belongs to someone else. My name was on the front in my mother's handwriting. I looked up at Diane. She said, "I found it in my grandmother's attic. I've been researching your family, trying to understand why you left the way you did, whether there was something in your history I'd missed. something that explained it. Your mother had given the letter to my grandmother for safekeeping after her diagnosis. She was afraid you'd never read it if she gave it to you directly. I opened the envelope with hands that weren't steady. My mother's letter told me that my father had left for the wrong reasons, that he had spent the rest of his life understanding that quietly, without ever saying it to anyone, that the pattern, the suspicion, the exit, the refusal to ask the question, had lived in our family like an inheritance nobody chose. She told me, if you were reading this, you already have a reason to leave someone you love. Don't. I looked up at Diane. Her eyes were wet, but her face was composed. I thought you'd read it before you left, she said. I thought you chose to go anyway. That's why I said what I said. That's why I didn't fight. 2 years of a splinter working its way through me finally reached the surface. You already knew hadn't been a confession. It had been a goodbye to a man she believed, had read his mother's warning and left regardless. I didn't get the ending people want from these stories. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no clean return to what would been. Real damage doesn't work that way. It leaves load-bearing marks, the kind that change how weight distributes forever. David stepped aside with a dignity I didn't deserve to witness. He told me to be what Diane had needed 2 years ago and to be it now. Then he went inside and I stood on that porch, understanding for the first time what it looked like when a genuinely good man made a graceful exit. Diane made one condition. One, she said Nora would meet me as a person first. Not as a father, not as a concept, not as a title. She said Nora would decide what she called me, if she called me anything at all. I agreed without hesitation. The first time I sat with Nora, we were on the living room floor with a set of wooden building blocks between us. She was 2 years and 3 months old and completely unbothered by my presence, which I understood was the greatest mercy she could have offered me. She studied each block before placing it. She had opinions about colors. She had her mother's focus. And I could see it now that I was looking. My grandmother, I link his eyes. That gray center, that dark ring. She picked up a red block and held it out toward me. Arm fully extended, face serious. I took it. She didn't call me anything, but she didn't move away either. And from somewhere near the doorway, I felt Diane watching. When I glanced over, she was holding the envelope. My mother's letter, not the original. I'd taken that home, folded it into my wallet, carried it like the thing it was. This was a copy she'd made before giving it to me. She kept one for herself. I didn't ask why. Some things you understand without asking. She had held that letter for 2 years, believing it was proof that I had chosen to leave knowing everything. It had been the only explanation that made my departure bearable, taking it fully away from her. Replacing it with the real version of events was something she needed to do at her own pace. So I turned back to my daughter and picked up a blue block and we built something, small and fragile and standing.